Morning, everybody. It's 11 a.m. We will go ahead and call the meeting to order. We're here for the Assembly Enterprise and Utility Oversight Committee of the whole meeting. It's February 15th, and we are noticed to be here from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. First off, I think we'll start with member introductions. To my left,
George Martinez.
Kevin Cross.
Karen Braga.
Zach Johnson. And is there anyone on the phone?
No, Mr. Chair.
Doesn't look like it. And
Randy over here.
all right, thanks, Randy. And then to my right.
Good afternoon, this is Eric Adams, Program Manager for Jacobs on the AMP program.
Third, Mimi CFO.
And Steve Rebuffo, Director of Tom Young, Port Alaska.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Now we have two items on the agenda. Both are related to the Port of Alaska. So I think I'll kind of leave it to you to decide how to manage the time. These are the only things we have on the agenda between now and 12 p.m. I'm not saying we have to take a full hour, but in terms of how you guys want to break it up, I'll leave that to you. Sure.
And I'd like to certainly have Eric go first because he has a longer presentation, might be more questions, and then my stuff is more informational. If we get to it, we get to it, but I think we should certainly start there.
Okay, I'll just note that we've been joined by Member Brawley. So Eric, go ahead, take it away.
Well, Mr. Chair, before we turn it over to Eric to do some, to do his presentation, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes at the beginning to, once again acknowledge the loss of Bob Owens to the port and to this program. Bob has been an absolute advocate and source of very staged counsel for a very long time. And I'll go back 16 years with the relationship that he and I have had working through the old intermodal expansion project and all the efforts leading up to the litigation effort. He has been just a tireless source of mentorship for me as well. He will be sorely missed by the court, and we will do our best to keep things moving in his memory, if for no other reason.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Steve. And
Sorry, just a moment there. I'm getting away.
Mr. Chair, I just want you to let you know that there's a muni-wide internet issue, so your live recording is not happening right now, but I believe Mr. Salt is still on the phone, so.
Okay, so I don't know if
down.
the mic wanted to pick that up, but just for the record, Ms. Van Clausen has just informed us that there's a internet issue that may have disrupted the live feed, so we did not turn it off intentionally or anything like that. It's just a technical difficulty. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you, Sheriff. Jacobs, PMO, PM staff would just echo the same comments that Steve made about Bob Owens as well. Great support on this program. Okay, so today we're here to talk about the estimates that we received. As we all know, these are estimates. We have multiple data points. No two estimates are ever going to be combined into one. The goal is to present this as a point from a budgetary standpoint to support Alden on the authorization of revenue bonds, realizing that the contractor's final price will determine that. So next slide, please. So the agenda is purpose of the cost estimates, major item cost comparison, variable item analysis. We'll close the gap on the difference between the two and talk about the next steps and what we're taking to ensure that the most cost-contained approach is going forward. Next slide, please. Purpose of cost estimates. Primary purpose is to secure adequate owner funding. Contractor bids determine the actual price. Contractors have relationships with material vendors and fabricators for best pricing. Contractors, as we'll see in this presentation, will be looking for efficient installation methods for a competitive advantage, and it's currently the contractor's market. And one of the reasons why I want to point out that it's currently the contractor's market is on the next slide here. So we have a timeline of showing when the construction only of the cargo terminals are going to be ongoing. As you can see, there's 3 projects in the Pacific Northwest down there. The Hood River Bridge replacement is about $520 million. They just received a $200 million mega grant. The Interstate Bridge replacement, having a cost decree there. That's the bridge between Portland and Washington on I-5. That total project cost is $5 to $7.5 billion. but the bridge work that we'd be competing with marine equipment for is about 1.5 to 2 billion of that total cost. And then we have the Bremerton Shipyard repair and replacement. That's the Navy shipyard down there in Bremerton, which is about $4 to $5 billion. That's about the same timeline going out for bid and construction start. Now, a number of items could delay those items, but I just want to point out, like, there's a lot of competing market factors that goes into marine equipment be coming up from the Pacific Northwest. Also, one of the items that isn't on here is the Port of Nome. I think the Army Corps of Engineers is going to release that in 2024 as well. And that's about a $250 million construction project. So as we look at these, there's multiple competing factors going into potential market drivers for the cost of this thing. So I just want to clarify that. Next slide, please. The independent cost estimate uses a tool to cross-check and analyze the DOR estimate. Developed from a contractor's view of their work. We met with them, the team met to review differences. The design of record, the PMO, the POA, and the ICE team met last week, went over all the differences between the two cost estimates. Some of them are close, some of them not, and I'll explain to those as we go on and move forward on it. But it's pretty lengthy discussion, and we went through it and pretty positive results, things that we can take back and make sure we use in the design for cost containment items. Next slide, please. So this is a big number here, the cost estimate comparison. The DOR 65% design, $660 million. The ICE came in at $455 million. We did receive the updated 95% cost estimate from the designer of record, which is $644 million. Really quick, the difference between the 95% designer of record estimate and the 65% designer of record estimate is we're able to remove approximately 20 feet of the total piling length. It comes down, that cost is one of the main drivers on that. It actually helps quite a bit because it opens up the market to allow for smaller cranes to come in and be able to do this work potentially than some of the larger cranes that we usually see up here. The difference between a 500-ton floating crane versus a 300-ton. But the difference between the 265% estimates is $204 million. Why the difference is, and we want to talk about that here coming up. Next slide, please. Major item cost comparison from the bid tabs. Next slide is the shoreline stabilization. So this is one of the key items that the ICE focused on that we can use to make sure it's in the final design, potentially cut costs. The independent cost estimator, we used some of the primary armor rock, about 500 yards, not all of it, to save on material cost. But one of the things they did come up with is using crushed concrete from the existing dock that we're going to demo to make the filter rock to save on material costs. With that, I do want to point out, though, if we allow that to happen down on the port, when you crush rock, there's a plume of smoke, dust from winds in those items, and so you might hear some complaints from citizens or businesses in that area. If you think about a big rock crusher, we'll take mitigations to prevent that, but we can't control how hard the wind blows. And so just some couple key points here. There you see it's about a $11 million difference between the two. I'm going to get into some specifics here. Some of the quotes the ICE used on the primary armor rock, they used, we have about 23,000 cubic yards needed for the armor rock. The ICE used $273 per cubic yard. The designer of record used $492. The two recent bids that we received down there on the port, for example, the NES-1 project, we received two bids on that. The armor rock on that one bid was $460 a cubic yard, and the other one was $500 per cubic yard for the armor rock. And so the ICE is approximately $219 less per cubic yard than typically what we've been seeing going forward. And the whole goal of the ICE is that the Jacobs team, the PMO, the POA did not influence it. Here's the documents, you guys go out and do that. But I just want to point out the differences on some of these large costs that we're seeing. The idea to recrush the concrete is a great way to save money for the filter rock. The designer of record estimated about $200 a cubic yard. The ICE estimated about $58 a cubic yard. And so being able to use that rock and recrush it is a cost savings. The delta between those two is about $150 per cubic yard. The prices the designer of record used on that shoreline stabilization is similar to the prices that we've been seeing here on recent bids in Alaska. Same with the granular fill. We're about $78 a cubic yard for the designer of record and $49 for the ice, with a delta of about $29. Once again, the designer of record is what we've been seeing. Those prices are what we've been seeing at the market here based on the AS1 project and the PCT projects. Those costs for rock. Does anybody have any questions on that specifically, or I don't know if you guys back and forth during this, please, I encourage it.
I would say if there's general questions, let's save them for the end, but does anyone have any specific questions on this slide before we, well?
Okay, great. Next slide, furnished piling. So this is basically all the 72-inch and 48-inch piling. See there's a cost delta there of about $8 million, about 6%. The DOR estimate about $1.98 per pound, and that is an average because we have two different thicknesses on the piling. The wall thickness, each piling is about 200 feet long. The first 100 feet of it is an inch thick, and the next 100 feet is 2-inch thick. That has to do with the number of items, and the top 100 foot of it is epoxy coated. So the difference there is $1.98 per pound, epoxy coated from the DR, and the ice is $1.82, similar. Market analysis indicates that the price of steel is decreasing from filter prices, so that's a positive as well. And when this hits the street and the final numbers come in, those numbers could go down on that cost per pound that we're seeing. But once again, we don't dictate that, other market items do. Next slide, please. Install piling. This is a lot closer. We're at about 3% difference there, about $900,000 total. The designer record estimated installing full-length piling requiring larger cranes. So I mentioned that the designer record's estimating a 500-ton marine spread and a 350-ton, I believe, 350-ton crane, so two marine spreads, large cranes. The ice is estimating a 300-ton marine crane and a 230-ton land-based crane. The ice estimated that we could split the piling in two and perform welding on site, and that's some of the images that you see on the right. And what that does is allow for smaller equipment, which is more widely available. Not everybody has a 500-ton marine floating crane, but you could put a 300-ton crane on a barge and get it up here if you want to. That helps expand and allow the price of equipment to potentially come down. But despite the different installation methods, the cost is pretty similar. Next slide. So this is a larger delta temporary work access. The DR estimated constructing the temporary trestles to work from. Just want to explain what temporary trestle is. So trestles are the things that you drive out to the face of the wharf. And we put in there that the contractor would need to look at, enter the estimate that the contractor could use a temporary trestle if needed. However, the ICE looked at it differently, which is very positive in a way, is that they looked at with these smaller cranes, if they split the pilings in half and perform the welding in the field, they could go in and necessarily not drive the temporary work access trestle. And that's a potential savings of about $22 million there. But once again, that's up to the means and methods of the contractor. And so the ICE estimated, instead of building a temporary trestle, what they do is they go in and do the shoreline stabilization at the end of each trestle and then drive a crane out there and be able to drive the piling going forward. One of the risks though, that as you mentioned, as you can see, if you see the yellow crane in that photo, I know it's a little bit smaller, that is sitting on the existing POL1 dock. That is a risk that we're looking at because the last thing that we don't want to have is a 300-ton crane sitting on the bottom of the ocean floor. We all know the shape and the current condition of the port down there. They do have in their estimate though about $4 million of that to shore up the POL1, basically drive piling through the deck, put in H-beams and build a crane pad mat on there. But once again, we're still reviewing that, and that's an option or a risk that we need to work closely with POA on, because we don't want that, crane sitting out there impacting shipping hazards. And so we're looking at that.
So I guess kind of on that, when do we expect to know more? I mean, the design director, you're talking to the POA about evaluating these risks and the options. When do we expect to have a response? Because obviously there's a significant delta in here, and it sounds like we don't know for certain which way we're gonna land.
So that's actually a contractor means and methods. Like a contractor A can come in and do it like they're shown in the photo there, but contractor B can say, I don't have a 300-ton crane, I want to bring in the 300, I need to bring in build a temporary trestle. We allow for that temporary trestle to happen, but it's not up to us to dictate how that work is performed.
Okay, thanks.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. To answer you, to follow on, Ashley, when we say evaluate options and risk, we'll put it in the bidding documents, some certain criteria that they have to prove to us that it would work if they're gonna go forward and do it. So we eliminate the risk from the city, to answer your question a little bit further. That's when I say we're evaluating it, we'll make sure the final specifications say this all has to be met if you wanna do this, to remove the risk from the city. Okay, next slide. Wharf and trestle construction, we're about $13 million difference there. This includes the abutments, the precast concrete, the crane, rail system, and utilities on the dock. So basically, if you think of everything on the dock of the steel, the main superstructure, that's the difference in cost there. Next slide, please. Primary power and lighting, this is a larger cost here, about a $20 million difference. We have quite a few control cabinets and things that need to be protected from the weather. The design of record has a estimated constructing a small building. I liken it to like a Connex sized building. It's about the size of a Connex. The ICE estimated a prefabricated building, which are typically less. Both would work. But the prefabricated building has a little bit longer lead times, about 45 weeks. This price includes furnishing and install telecom and instrumentation and controls for the entire project. We refer to it as like a mini substation to power all the cranes. And we have to have a lot of control panels to identify if there's a leak in the current or anything like that. But one of the things that we've taken back from here is that we are going back into the specifications and making sure that this is an option to reduce the costs and focus on that. Next slide, please. So here's the current cost per square foot comparison. About 8% difference when you look at it being all built. This is the estimated cost of the structure, piling deck, fenders, wharf, and trestle construction. Once again, just focusing on the main superstructure that people physically see. Similar, within 8% there. Any questions?
No, go ahead.
Okay, this is, these are the items that we don't, variable item analysis, I like to call it. Contractors overhead markup and escalation. With that, just when I talk about overhead, just to clarify, we talk about the overhead in this scenario is what is the project staff to manage that size of a project? What is required for like a bulking? We'll get to it, but these are the 3 points. Next slide. So here's the overhead estimate difference that's really driving the big delta is about $91 million. Yes, that's a very big number, and I get that. Overhead, as I mentioned, is comprised of project supervision, staff vehicles, project job office expenses, what we call a bulk crew. Basically, that bulk crew is a large crew that goes around and continuously cleans up, puts up the SWEP, sedimentation, erosion control, just basically laborers that clean up and support all aspects of the project, maintenance of equipment, etc. The DR included a much larger supervision crew than the ICE estimate. They feel that the people needed to oversee this is quite a bit larger than what the ICE did. And that is something that we, as contractor means and methods, I can't dictate how many people they have is like a project manager, field engineers, that's contractor specific. They also included equipment repair work area, maintenance work area to repair any of the broken equipment and grease and all that stuff. So I mentioned bulk crew consistent throughout the project. One of the main differences that I want to point out, craft staff travel from the lower 48 to support construction. The independent cost estimator, they are bringing up, when they did this bid, they are bringing up their supervision and looked at local craft to provide the pile bucks, the laborers and those items. The designer of record looked at what would happen is if that local resource wasn't available for some reason due to competing projects, and you basically had to support the entire crew flying from out. And that's a large difference there. And that's a quite a bit bigger difference, but I do just want to comment is that we can't dictate that in the plans and specifications. That's contractor dependent on how much they think they need to supervise this size of project. Any questions on that one? That's the largest number difference. Okay.
Do you have any sense for a confidence level that we'd be able to rely on local tradespeople to do it? And I mean, I guess as with a lot of these things, it's significant differences. So I think it's kind of asking where do we think we'd actually land on this. I mean, like you talked about, the DOR was looking at bringing people in the floor for a gate. I said we probably don't have to, which is more probable.
I can't dictate what the contractor is going to say, right? And I can't, it's probably going to end up somewhere in the middle between those two, that combination.
Mr. Ross?
Yeah, on these larger projects, though, it's very common to have to bring in a considerable workforce. I worked on both the Native Medical Center and the Elmendorf Hospital, spent a couple of years on both projects, and a large percentage of the workforce were individuals that came up from the West Coast. Particularly the trade unions, they have other relationships when you're using union trade because, you're either recruiting more people within the union, but then it's easier to find other affiliated union members that have the same or adequate training and they bring them up. Which just understanding that's something else is that when, that's going to be additional stress on housing, isn't it, to find what we used to do is build man camps, and I don't know what that looks like. But when you got a project that large, I don't see any way to avoiding, particularly when you're getting very specific skills. Welding these pilings and things like that, is a very specific trade, and it's very difficult to find locally just given our population. So, thank you.
Just to add on that, so that difference includes a housing cost, meals, vehicles and trucks for all that crew that come up here, because you can't just lock them in a box and not take care of them, right? And so a lot of that cost that, when I just look at labor, that's one thing, but when you look at the backup cost, housing and all that stuff, and trying to provide that year round for 4 years of construction and demolition, the costs drive up.
And you're saying essentially this is something that we have very little, if any, control over in the contract process. I mean, that's $90 million of uncertainties is a lot to accept.
Yeah, but I don't dictate where the labor force comes from. We can't do that in the plans and specifications. Like I know we don't have in Alaska a 500-ton marine floating barge just sitting here with the staff. I can tell you that on NES-1, currently that outside of some of the groundwork, but all the marine work, that crew is being flown in from, the majority of that crew is going to be flown in from out of state.
Thanks.
Next slide, please. So the markup estimate difference is about 32%, but I want to just talk about what that means. That markup is if your base cost is higher to start with, that markup is going to be higher because we all know 15% of $100 is 15, but 15% of $200 is more. So when you're looking at that base cost before you apply the markups, that's what really drives up the larger markup differences. But one of the key things I just want to point out is both these estimates used approximately 15%. One was at like 14.9 and the other one was about 14.6 on the markups going across the board. And so that's a really close difference. The large difference you see on those numbers there, once again, is this is how big we think the project is, then they apply that markup on top. So if we go back to the overhead and supervision, that $91 million, that 15%, if you think about it, is applied across that, which brings that delta up a little bit higher.
And I believe Member Brawley had a question on this one?
Sure.
Yeah, it's actually on both, but really it's more applicable to this one. So I understand the principle. I've been a contractor, not building things, but professional services. So I just know that part of this is building profit into this in order to incentivize people to bid on this project. However, what you just said about percentage, I do have some concerns about that. And I just wonder, is it standard to build into RFPs cost controls in terms of maxing out? Because what you said basically is there's a bad incentive to escalate the cost, and I'm not saying that's what's being done here, but there is a bad incentive if your profit margin just simply goes up as a straight percentage with the cost. So I just wondered, is that something that gets built into the RFP? Is there a limit on that? Is there, and I also understand it's an incentive for the contractor to limit their expenses, right? So that they can maximize their profit, because if there's overruns, it might run into that total. But I guess I'm just concerned about that, because it does seem like just applying a straight percentage for a project of this scale is challenging. I mean, and because we're talking about public money, so are we going to the legislature and to the federal government and saying we want X amount of profit specifically? Because that seems like a challenging argument to make. And then also on the point of overhead, I understand that one is variable, but it looks like it ranges from 7 to 19% of the project total, so that is a huge difference. And again, I just wonder, is there, I guess I'm used to the nonprofit world, which is a different thing, but where overhead is limited to 10%. Like that is what an organization can take off the top as far as grant administration. So I understand this is a different world, but I just want to raise both of those questions because these are soft costs that do have some variability, and so we could, in theory, put them into the RFP as a control. So I just wonder if that's been done, if that's typical, and also how we can address this issue of disconnecting the cost escalation from the profit escalation.
Okay, so this is going to be, the second part of the RFP is going to be basically approached from an invitation to bid, low cost on there, and so it does not have that, you're limited to this amount of markup. It will have in the contract for any change orders going forward that you're limited to this much on subcontractors and all that stuff, but I can't go in and dictate what the contractor's profit is projected to be in a market from an invitational ITB project. And again, I don't think I can, I don't know the meaning procurement rules 100%, but I can follow up. I don't think I'm allowed to do that, period, unless it's a professional engineering one. I can negotiate those items through, or a professional services one.
Thanks, and yeah, I understand there's limits. I guess I just want to flag this as a relevant part of the discussion, right, of how much of this is hard cost versus soft cost. Because again, hard costs we don't have very much control over, but soft costs it seems like we do. Thanks.
Yeah, it can get difficult, particularly on these larger projects, because one is the number of individuals that can do something to this magnitude is limited, right? So the amount of contractors that are bidding on it that have the experience and expertise, and they have those metrics, and 15% for large commercial construction is pretty standard, at least in Anchorage. And then yes, it applies in your contracts you have for the change orders. Change orders obviously create additional work above and beyond the original contract, so typically is say above and beyond, there's a 15% general contractor charge in there, so it sounds like it's pretty much in line, only on a much larger scale to other similar commercial projects. So, I mean, obviously we'll know better when we put it out for bid, and if individuals really want a job that's of that magnitude, they may decide to reduce it from 15 to 14.5 or something to undercut the competitor, but I guess that's where they're just saying 15 seems to be about where they're coming in, but when we actually put it out for RFP, we'll see if they, that competitive bid process will hopefully push that down some. Thank you.
To the chair, if I can just add on to Assembly Person Cross's comment there. Just want to back, if you guys, we don't need to actually back up, but if you go back to the slide where I show competing projects, right? It's at the very beginning, if you guys just I mean, we have all those 3 mega projects that are gonna be occurring in the Pacific Northwest. Some contractor can be really hungry and say, look, I need to really drive down my costs, drive down, and come in at, say, the ice level of what they're showing. But if all the contractors that are available to do this work are also bidding on this work, the risk that we run at that we can't control is that, I'm just gonna I'm gonna go from 15% to 25 on my initial bid. I can't control that, because if they just think, let's try and make a bunch, we don't control that on the market-driven factors.
Yeah, Member Raleigh?
Yeah, I guess all of this is making me very happy that we have that legal contract to write the terms of the RFP, because we are a very small actor in a very sophisticated field that I hope we don't get taken advantage of. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll say it too. I mean, this is certainly outside of my area of expertise, but it is a little frightening. I mean, especially when you look at this $90 million delta, and then when I kind of compare that to what looks like a lot of competition for a limited pool of skilled professionals who can do this work, it makes me think that we're going to end up a lot closer to the 126 million than the 35 million. I mean, just kind of, and I understand there's a lot that we don't know, but it seems if it's supply and demand, it seems like we have a very limited supply. Where there's a lot of demand and such, just gives me some apprehension.
Yeah, just want to add in, and that's why, it's positive that we went and got the ice, because one of the things that we're doing is we're making sure that splicing is allowed, right, into the pilings, and so they can use smaller marine equipment potentially, and that opens up that pool of bidders on that, right? And so we're trying to drive that pool to be larger, but there's only still a limited number of 300-ton marine floating cranes out there. And so we're trying to drive that a little bit larger.
We're only about halfway through.
Zach, I'm going to comment. I mean, this is why it's critical for us to be able to move forward on the 27th with our authorization, so we can get this out in March, so we can stay ahead of this curve, because I'll guarantee if you go farther along, you're going to have more competition. Right now, we have the chance of being slightly in advance of this, and we do not want this process slowed down at all. So this is good dialogue for us to be having, but let's get this decision done on the 27th so we can keep that small lead that we have for the biggest pool of contractors as possible.
Yeah, we'll take it in a lot as well. Let's keep moving along the presentation.
Yeah. Keep going. I think we're slide 18. And we talked about escalation, closing the gap. So major work item breakdown. This closes the $204 million gap. I talked about all these. Didn't go into depth and detail on any of them. But that will close that difference there is the $204 million, just for you guys to look at. Next slide, please. Estimate agreements, steel pile price, markup percentage, escalation cost, square footage cost of the structure, installation cost of the structural elements. And so the main items they're in agreement with is some of these variable costs that they're not. Next slide, please. Estimate differences. We talked about these, just high level, and we're taking that note into account to make sure those are driven into the final estimate. And so we're working through that now. Not final estimate, but the final design. Next slide, please. Conclusions, excluding overhead estimates. If you look at the class 2 accuracy range that I've talked about a plus 15 and minus 10, you apply the extremes at each of those, they do cross at a certain point if you remove the overhead from both bids, and so that's really the driving factor separation between that is the overhead. And contractor bids will determine the actual price. So next steps for us on the Jacobs side and the POA is incorporate the innovations of the ICE as identified into the design. We're doing that. We reviewed it with them again yesterday to make sure, and so I'm feeling pretty confident that we've addressed all their comments, and we're making sure that they're available for all the bidders. Review proposals and the T1 pre-qualification process is out on the street right now. Request lump sum bids from qualified proposals in March, and then the plan is notice to proceed in October 2024. And that's it.
I saw Mr. Martinez's hands go up and was looking good to keep.
Just real quick, try to be fast.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for this presentation, and Alden, I appreciate the fine point that you just laid out for us with respect to the action coming before the body. It seems that we are at a overall market disadvantage, just generally speaking, and any slim advantage we have is related to the timing of our inertia at this particular point. And I don't think I think it's something that people should not take any degree lightly about at all. It is a small, slim advantage in an ecosystem that basically dwarfs us. And I just appreciate that you highlighted that, because you've taken the time to work with the different members to bring us up to speed on the other aspect of the action coming before the body. And so I just appreciate that, and I wanted to make sure that that is captured clearly on the record today. Thank you.
And then I have Mr. Crossman and Mr. Raleigh after.
Yeah, real quick. One, has there been any design changes due to the seismic/tsunami study that came from OEM? Have we heard that that's affecting costs?
On the seismic study, no, there's no changes on the design.
Excellent. To the next, the concrete crusher, or reusing some of that, one way is, and I don't know what size that looks like or what the equipment is. The other area is that you try to move that indoors, not to create so much noise. I happen to know we own a really large, strong structure that we're paying a lot of money for. So if you're looking for a large building that you could utilize in order to save several $1 million, we happen to own one. It's sitting, I think we're paying $5,000 a month for it, just a thought. And then finally, the welded pilings, as opposed to a continual run. Obviously, welding, no issues with structural integrity as far as having a welded joint as opposed to a solid run piling. It's still going to be, that doesn't change the wall thickness of the pipe or anything for requirements.
Through the chair to Assembly Member Cross, the welding, what we're looking at that right now, and that one of the key things is that we want to make sure it has to occur, when the final piling is driven, that it's below the mud line at a certain depth. With that will incur additional costs for inspection services to ensure the integrity of that piling, and that it's not ending up in the bending moment of the piling. And all those items are currently being considered to look at, and at this stage, based on my meeting yesterday, it's pretty feasible that we can address. And that will be in the final plan set that we get here shortly.
Thank you. That was all my questions. Oh, and as far as the labor, if you want to recruit some people, we should throw in some fishing charters, because that might get some people to want to come up here and increase that labor. I know there was always incentives I had when I had to go out of town. So thank you.
We couldn't spend any grant money on that,
Yeah.
but we could come out of pocket if we need to.
Member Raleigh.
Yeah, thanks. I have to do a couple questions, but I'll hold those because they're not on this particular topic. But in terms of next steps, you mentioned incorporating the innovations. This is just my ignorance. Is this what's known as value engineering? Can you just explain that term? Because I know we talk about it a lot. I know it's generally the idea of, as I understand it, kind of reducing the cost or finding ways to save costs. So can you explain, is that what this is?
Through the chair to Assemblyperson Brawley, incorporating these ideas for, I'm going to take an example, like crushing the concrete, right? We are going to allow that to happen, but contractor B could come in and say, and it all depends on their entire approach to the work, because the ICE estimated that, they demolish some of it. And so it really depends on the contractor. But in the original plans, we did not allow for that option to have that in there. We did, when I say don't allow, we just said, hey, you have to meet this certain type 2 class material. And the ICE took advantage of that, where the designer of record said this is what you'd have to pay if you had to go to the market. And so it's being looked at and will be allowed and encouraged if people want to use that to drive the cost down.
And then other question, when this RFP goes out, and again, I hear what Alden has said before, which is we don't want to delay it, so I'm not asking for purpose of delay. Just so I'm clear though, is it a not to exceed dollar amount, or are these designs really giving a range? And then what happens if a contractor comes back and say is 10% above this highest range?
Well, we're gonna discuss what our authorization is for what we believe this amount to be, which will allow us to put that out on the street, and then the actual cost will come back. And, the plan is to take the least expensive of our options. Could it be more than what we did? I hope not, but if it did, we'd have to come back and we'd have to get authorization for that additional amount. All of those factors that you saw in there are gonna play in there, but I think they're trying to get more bidders by doing some of these things, and if we can beat the schedule to try to get ahead of some of these other projects, then we're hoping that the project will come in within this guideline. But we're gonna get guidelines, and we're gonna get authorization based upon what we think it is with all these resources, and what actually happens, we will deal with that when the bids get opened and we move it. But pretty sure we all know we need a Terminal 1 ASAP, and whatever that cost is, we're gonna have to ultimately pay.
Thanks.
So I have Mr. Martinez in the queue, but just a quick follow-up to that, then if God forbid, we would put it out there and the bids come back and they all sort of exceed our cost estimates and then what would be covered through the funding mechanisms we'd identified, would we then have to take it up again, like to authorize a larger revenue bond?
You're gonna have to take up multiple authorizations throughout this entire project. When I brought you all in, the discussion was we were gonna do an authorization just for Terminal 1 construction. We can talk about that. There are other things that they already have, and it's a couple of us on my slide as well, but this is a $2 billion project, and we've only done 200 million of it so far. So there's lots of authorizations. If you want to give a big authorization up front, then we don't have to come back as many times. If you want to do this piecemeal, you're going to see us quite often through this particular process that we're going through right here as we go through it. But the conversations with you at this point was we're trying to just focus on Terminal 1 and what we need to do at this particular point in time. And what you feel comfortable with, but I haven't gotten my presentation, but I'm gonna reiterate here, I have committed that we won't sell revenue bonds until we actually need the money. So you get multiple shots to see the progress that this is going on. When we get the authorization, that's just allowing us to put it in SAP so we can get these contracts out on the street and see what the actual bids come back. We're not selling anything at that point in time. So you're going to be informed and communicated all the way along this entire process. And if the bids come in higher, those conversations will have to take place. But we will have to have a funding mechanism to pay for whatever those costs happen to be.
Mr. Buffley,
Only to add that the other part of the plan of finance will always be that as federal grant opportunities come up, we'll apply for those. Hopefully, the state sees the value in this and wants to contribute. And still looming out there is this merit lawsuit settlement, which could stretch your recommendation for reaching out for bonds far longer than it would otherwise be if none of that was in play for Terminal 1.
thanks. Member Martinez?
Yeah, just off the funding for a second, just go back to the environmental impact and mitigation question around crushing and the rock or concrete crushing. How far away are we from that operationally? Because I would imagine that that's going to be, and I just want to make sure there are members here for whose district they're not present, and I can hear the chair's voice saying, "Oh, a cloud of dust, toxic dust over his neighborhood specifically." So, just how far along are we before we even get to that, and then what public input do we have with respect to that type of impact, if you would?
Through the chair to Assemblyperson Martinez, just to make sure I understand your question, you're looking for a distance, and from whose district are we potentially going to be impacting?
Oh, we know the district. The port is where it is, and that's not moving. No, but just with respect to, I can hear that will be a very important conversation for assembly members to have. It's going to be important for me, even if it's not my district, it's an environmental concern, right? But if it's operationally allowed, if we know would it possibly be happening, and what potential public input would we have members of the district to say something about that particular practice that would potentially cause concern for them.
So let me just back up on the concrete crushing, right? We would put requirements in there where they had to like spray and keep, mist the water to try and keep that dust down quite a bit. So maybe I overstated when I say like a cloud of dust going, right? And the potential is not to have that happen. As far as you going to have those discussions with your constituents, at this point, I don't know when that timeline would occur, but we are looking at allowing that to happen in the project.
Yeah, and I just to be clear, I don't believe that there's any mitigation efforts that are going to change the conversation for some folks who still want to have that conversation because it's what they're going to do to protect the interests of the community, right? So, so it's not to say that there wouldn't be mitigation. I just want to be clear about that. But it seems like those sorts of impacts might be something that flares up later on with respect to community interest, and it may just cause some problems down the line.
Eric, when we get the bids back, will they say this is how we plan to meet this fill requirement and so forth, and that they're gonna crush or not crush? So when we get the bids back, they'll delineate maybe how they're gonna meet this requirement, and then that way you'll know whether it's gonna happen or not, and if it's the low bid and it's going to happen, then maybe those conversations would probably start at that point in time.
Okay, thanks to help clarify that question. Yes, and so when we get the bids back, right, one of the things that are required is a schedule with a cash flow spend plan and a work plan, right? And so that'll all be incorporated. So, with an NTP anticipated in October of 2024 of this year, right, is when we would have all that information. And likely at the end of the year, through the proper channels, we would share that with the assembly. And there would be, I don't believe anything would be occurring with that in 2025. It'd be more the 2026 timeframe, although some of it could occur, in 2025 timeframe. But you'd have 6 to 8 months of it.
I appreciate that. Just want to make sure on the record there would be opportunity for public input with respect to those types of questions as they come down the pipe.
Yeah, so it's probably about 6 months.
So we'll make sure we keep our eyes open for that. Now, we've got about 11 minutes left, and I want to get to CFO's presentation. Before you start, though, Mr. Farron, is anyone here for audience participation?
We have solid waste services too.
Not today. So, Mr. Farron, the floor is yours.
Perfect, and I'll be brief. This was meant to mainly be just a refresher for everybody that's currently in on base and so forth. You can go to the next slide, please. We put in 2 different ordinances. One was put in to get this process going on January 23rd. We wanted you to all, and for the public as well. Those amounts were all based upon the amounts that we used when I brought you all into my office and we had those conversations. That was at basically the 35% design that we've been using for quite some time, of approximately $600 million, and we had the anticipated amount of unencumbered budget at the end of March or end of February being about $204 million. So the delta was $396 million. That was in all your packets at that point in time. And that's what we went to you, we went to big users, and we had that conversation. So that was the original one that was put in on January 23rd, and that's how we came up with the $396 million in authorization. Next slide, please. After we put that one in, we were given the 65% design number at that point in time of $663 million. I know it's like 661 or something like that. They made a few tweaks after that, but we were given 663. We also had additional conversations with the port and all of their relevant parties. They revised how much they were going to believe to have used of our unencumbered budget to $192 million being left at the end rather than that 204 from the prior slide. So 663 minus the 192 gave us the 471. We submitted an S version that was in your assembly packets this last Tuesday. And you're aware, since the number went up, we wanted to make sure we met our 2 meeting requirement. That is out there, and that's the current S version that is there. Our hope is that this will be public testimony and voted on the 27th, as I mentioned, to continue this timeline. Now, the good news is you heard every one of the numbers talked today is less than 663 million. If it was more, then we'd have a problem because we have to have that two meeting period. So I feel very comfortable that we've got an S version that's currently out there that meets any number that you heard today as we go through here. Next slide, please.
Just real quick for you, I think Member Brawley had a question on this slide.
Yeah, I could follow up offline for details, but so that's a $12 million difference with the unencumbered money, and we already talked about the first number. Does that include, I know there's the $5 million congressionally directed spending that is in jeopardy right now because of the budget, federal budget, as I understand it, whether or not they pass a continuing resolution with that in it. Is that part of this, or is that a separate amount?
The $5 million from the Murkowski grant, as well as any expenditure for that, is not included in any of these numbers. So we kept that out separately.
Okay, thanks. And then this is maybe a question outside of the scope of this, but that we got the news about the STIP, the State Transportation Improvement Program. Are any PAMP funds in jeopardy because of that, and any port funding in general? Okay, Steve, could you speak to that?
Okay, no.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. This is just kind of a summary. So this is where you'll get to, and you'll probably have your conversation on the upcoming Tuesday. But I need you to think, where you want to go. We're in good shape because we've got the 663 and the 471, so I feel very comfortable about that. However, you did hear about other numbers tonight, or this afternoon. One was the 95% number, was approximately 20 million less than the number we were using to begin with. And then you also heard a significantly lower number that is, that person's estimate in doing. I would like to dissuade you from using any number that is low because I want to stay as high as we can to meet whatever potential, and that's also goes back to Member Brawley's comments about how much is this actually going to come out and where are we at. We can obviously do amendment on the floor to reduce that if that's so chosen, but I want us to make sure we have a good number that we can count on going out in our purchasing for what we really feel. And I would not recommend anything less than the 95% designer of record number that's currently out there. But as we just discussed, we have I've tried to frame the whole conversation with you on Terminal 1. However, we have many other PAMP-related things that are going to be coming up here in the very near future. So if you left it at 663, I don't think that would be of any hurt. It just might maybe not have us come back a month later and ask for some initial money to be able to do some of these other projects that are coming up that are PAMP related. So I'm going to kind of give you the option here. My recommendation is definitely not to go below the 95% number because that's a pretty good number by the designer record. However, if you left it at 663, that would even though the 95% might have that $20 million gap, we are going to have to come back and ask for tens of millions of dollars of other authorization here in April, May, June for other related projects that are not necessarily Terminal 1 related. So I'm going to leave it to you. You can leave it at 663, and maybe we don't have to come back until the end of April because we've got that extra 20 million on some of the other contracts they're going to have to let out. Or you can maybe take it down to that smaller $20 million 95% number, but then no, we're going to be back, and I want to keep stating that, really quickly thereafter to ask for additional authorization for non-Terminal 1 related expenditures that are part of the PAMP. So those are just kind of things I wanted to get out there today for you to think about. But by all means, I would not, we can't go and say, just make a number up. We have to have let's split the difference between IC and the designer record. We're not doing that. We're not going low ball and hope that it comes in at that number. We're going to get authorization for a number that we feel very confident with will be no higher than what we would hope based upon all the ICE information you got as well as what you got from the designer of record. So I'm just trying to get that out there right now and give you some things to think about and hopefully minimize the amount of conversation on this on the 27th when we start determining what the dollar amount is. I will restate, the good news is no number was greater than 663, so we can have those conversations on the 27th, and I believe settle on a number and be able to get that passed, because as Mr. Martinez reiterated, I would like to get this done in February so that we are not holding up the continuing timeline that we need to be aggressive with to make this happen. It's not worth commiserating around a few million when you know this is a $2 billion project ultimately, and this is just another phase in that long process. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. About 4 minutes left. I think Member Brawley had one question.
Yeah, first I'll just say, I know you're concerned about maybe us going in and making amendments. I'm not intending to make one at this time, and if I do, I will talk to you first. My question is actually for Steve, because I know we don't have a lot of time. On the legal case, what is the administration's plan for staffing given the loss of Mr. Owens? Something you brought up earlier. So do we have an attorney assigned? I know that just happened and we're all sad about it, but what is the plan for that?
No, sure, I can't speak with a whole lot of certainty over what the municipal attorney's office is going to do. Anna Brawley will be going out to DC on March the 7th. The other Anna Brawley.
You didn't recuse yourself.
And Helzer is going to be going out to DC for the trial and represent the municipality. We had a meeting on Monday with the outside council, and the consensus was the municipality needs to have a face at the table. She may not have a speaking part because the attorneys have been carrying the water on this now for over 10 years. But to have representation there of the municipality is a smart idea. So she'll be going out for that. And but the heavy lifting is in the hands of Saifar Shah, and they're very prepared to take this.
And I'll just say this, Anna Brawley is actually going to DC with Chris Constant for the National League of Cities Conference. We'll be meeting with congressional offices, so we can talk offline, but I want to make sure that we're prepped for that conversation.
Sure.
On all things forward. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. I guess just quickly, as a matter of record, Member Brawley, excuse yourself. I think we're around 11:30, and Mr. Treasury just walked in, but unless anyone has a last minute question.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Rivera is also on the line.
Oh, and Mr. Rivera joined us on the phone at some point. I'm not seeing anyone else with anything last, so we'll go ahead and get out of here 2 minutes early. Thank you. We're adjourned.